Remember when she came in, I can't remember if it was statutorily created, but that's what this reminded me of. We used to have an ESA coordinator.
Okay, committee, we're live. We're ready to continue on with our agenda. We'll be discussing Bill 2, proposal number 296, Federal Policy Coordinator. Talise, will you lead us through that bill?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Talise Hanson, LSO. I'm presenting Bill Draft 24, LSO 296, Federal Policy Coordinator. This bill draft authorizes a position within the governor's office to protect Wyoming's interests against federal government overreach. Section 1 creates Wyoming Statute 91225. Subsection A provides that the governor shall employ a coordinator of Wyoming's interests with the advice and consent of the Senate in accordance with Wyoming Statute 2812-101 through 2812-103. The coordinator shall not be removed by the governor as provided in Wyoming Statute 91202, except the coordinator may be removed by the governor for malfeasance or misconduct. If a vacancy occurs, the governor shall appoint a successor in accordance with Wyoming Statute 2812-101B. Subsection B outlines the duties of the coordinator. The coordinator shall review all federal, legislative, and administrative acts for impacts to Wyoming state interests. The coordinator shall coordinate with all state departments, boards, commissions, and agencies, the legislature, and local governments to protect the state from federal government overreach into state and local interests. The coordinator shall administer an incentive program that shall incentivize employees of the state who protect the state's interests from federal government overreach. The incentive program may include bonuses or promotions for participating state employees. The coordinator shall recruit, and if funding is available, offer signing bonuses to state employees who are hired directly from federal land management agencies. The coordinator shall carry out all duties the governor assigns pertaining to protecting Wyoming's interests against federal government overreach. Section 2, subsection A authorizes the office of the governor one full-time position to fill this coordinator position as required by this act. And subsection B provides a $10 million appropriation from the federal general fund to the office of the governor for purposes of funding the position and for implementing this act. Subsection C provides that is the intent of the legislature that the position and the appropriation for the position be included in the standard budget. And section 3 provides an effective date of July 1, 2024. And I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Talise, do we have a fiscal note how much this would be on an annualized basis? Besides, we got $10 million proposed for appropriation. How much would it be how many years would that provide funding for?
Mr. Chairman, as written, the appropriation is authorized for beginning July 1, 2024 and ending June 30th, 2026. But then subsection C provides that the position and the appropriation shall be included in the standard budget. But that's the committee's prerogative to change that.
All right, thank you. All right, first up, we have the governor's office. Mr. Luthi, if you please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Randall Luthi, Energy Advisor for Governor Gordon. And let me say right off the bat, this is a fascinating, intriguing concept. Some of it is because it's just so non-traditional as the way we normally think in state government. That does not mean the governor supports or opposes it, but it means that we really have some questions and would love to continue discussing about it should you feel the need to do so. First thing I would point out is there is a similar situation or a similar position already created in statute. 91207 actually establishes a state planning coordinator. The governor has not yet filled that, but that is an authority to do that. And that planning coordinator does much as what the duties of this person would do in terms of coordinating federal comments, state comments, working with state agencies. That is also within the office of the governor, but it is more the traditional where it serves at the pleasure of the governor. And I think that's one of the things that makes this so interesting. You have a position within the governor's office that is not, that basically does not serve at the pleasure of the governor. The only way I was trying to think of how would that compare? And what I finally came up with is it's sort of like your in-laws, right? You marry, your in-laws are there when you get there, and your in-laws are probably there when you leave. Is that the type of situation we want the person, the governor to have, either he or she? As a rule, there's a reason we have elections. Elections are to promote change. They're to, provide an opportunity for whomever is elected, whichever party, to actually be able to take advantage of this electoral victory they have. This is different than that in particular, at least in this one position. Normally, a governor is able to bring in an entire team that either he or she wants. That team serves at the pleasure of the governor.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Luthi, can you repeat the citation you gave us before for the other coordinator position?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis, 91207.
Thank you.
Continue, Mr. Luthi.
I was on a roll. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, the governor can generally bring the person in who they would like. The directors of state agencies, again, are confirmed by the Senate, but they serve at the pleasure of the governor. This is a position, boards and commissions, normally the directors are confirmed by the Senate, but the actual executive director actually serves at the pleasure of that board. So it's somewhat similar to the WEA, WBC, except it's the director that would be confirmed by the Senate as opposed to their board members. Again, once a position becomes Senate confirmed, I would submit to you, but that becomes a political type situation. And that once again falls into the situation of we have elections for a reason, the ability to actually move on or keep whomever you would like. In this case, frankly, if we had a great person, perfect. If it happened to be a person that didn't, agree with the governor, didn't agree maybe with even the legislature, it would be a difficult position to get rid of. It appears as I read it, the only way is basically malfeasance or misfeasance that this person could be removed. So once again, I was going to also just touch on again that it's just a similar odd situation. I'm not saying it isn't workable, but it's very non-traditional things that we don't normally do. I did have some questions about the $10 million appropriation. As I read it, I would take it that this person would actually have the ability to offer incentives and bonuses, or at least thank you, good job to state employees. I don't know if that means that goes through the governor's office or that goes through the approval of the directors. I don't believe that is clear. It also appears to have the ability to attempt to recruit people from outside of state government. Again, are those hirings coordinated through the governor's office or the division of A&I or the directors of the various agencies? And last, is this person becomes similar to an agency director, yet do they actually have an agency to direct? This offers one position, but I would think this person would want to hire or at least contract out for other positions. I don't believe that is disallowed by the legislation, but I'm just not sure it's clear. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for questions or attempt to discuss this further.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Luthi. Questions? Mr. or Co-Chair Bowman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you bringing up those other statutory references. Mr. Luthi, looks like also 9-1-209 has a similar position. And, and I think that's probably why we have the bill the way it is. It says may, and, I'm sure these are positions that were filled at one time for some reason, and they just kind of go away after a while. And I think that's the concept that we're exploring here, where if you have and I agree, we need to make an amendment on the bill that say it'd be a 4-year term. So it's just not an indefinite appointment, and that, the intent here is to have a position that provides continuity. between, being on opposite cycles of a governor's term of office. And so I think that you do have some good input based off the bill draft. And I don't think we, necessarily have a whole lot of disagreement here, but certainly I think hopefully you can acknowledge that legislators have elections too. Would you agree with that?
Mr. Luthi.
To my knowledge, all of you have elections.
Okay. So just make sure that that's what we're discussing here, right? Is this idea of continuity and that, we are, when it comes to our relationship with the federal government, there's a trend here that I'm concerned about. Whether, no matter who's in office in DC, it seems like we're fluctuating back and forth between increasingly extreme positions. And a state like Wyoming is especially vulnerable to that fluctuation. And it might be beneficial to have a renewed effort on focusing on what's best for the state of Wyoming that takes a whole of government approach amongst the branches as well. So I hope that further explains the intent here and make sure that we're all, working together from the same, even though I agree there's a lot of amendments that need to be done in the bill draft. I hope that we can all understand that's what we're going for. That's our goal. So I don't have a question.
All
I'm
right.
better at making my statements into questions, but anything you'd like to say in response to that, I guess.
Mr. Luthi, any comments?
I believe what I heard, Mr. Chairman and Senator Boner, was, don't you agree?
Yes, that's fine.
So, and certainly I come here only with suggestions and, conversation points. The governor can't make a final decision about a bill till it's actually been passed by the legislature. But again, from someone as Representative Heiner mentioned earlier, been around for a long time, this is somewhat of a unique position, particularly in Wyoming state government.
Further questions? Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Luthi, looking at 91207 and 209, I'm embarrassed to say, I don't know if we have a state planning coordinator. And then do you know the last time that we've had a coordinator of state federal relations under 209?
Mr. Luthi.
Thank you. I am unaware on the second on 209. I do happen to know that I believe Mr. Mike McGrady served as that position under Governor Meade as 91207.
Yes, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, looking at this bill, hearing from the co-chairman, I think you understand, the interest in having the conversation about creating someone who can, advocate for Wyoming and their federal natural resource interests. Have you, when you were reviewing this bill, looked at amendments to like 209 to narrowly tailor it and actually utilize it? Or even if we were to make some amendments, I'm just concerned that unless we put if we change the shall to a may, that we authorize a position that you don't use when there's a desire to use it. So if you could help me understand if this is something you would actually want to use.
Mr. Luthi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Ellis, I can give you a firm maybe, because again, the bill is not in final form. I would be happy to work with the members of the committee should you move forward with suggested amendments as well, so that when it did eventually reach the governor's office, I would hope it would be in the most acceptable form.
Mr. Chairman, follow up.
Go ahead, Senator.
Have you, Mr. Luthi, had conversations about hiring someone to do the coordination of state federal relations in general?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis, it just so happens that I knew about 91207 because we have a memo going through our office exactly talking about that right now.
Mr. Chairman.
Follow up.
Mr. Chairman, follow up. This would be the 209.
Correct. And I will look at, pardon me, Mr. Chairman, I will go back and look at 209 as well.
Any other questions? Senator Kolb, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question about confirmation. Would that happen every time an election took place for the department heads in the office?
Mr. Luthi.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb, maybe.
Follow up, Senator.
No, it was the answer I expected. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So Chairman Boner.
And Mr. Chair, I do think I appreciate Mr. Luthi's, discussion about, what should be in these, duty titles here. There's always, there's been an idea floating around for years now about pursuing land exchanges between state and federal government. They just never gone off the ground. I think this would be a good, place to put that responsibility, similar to what the state of Utah does, where they, successfully advocate on a consistent basis for these land exchanges, which help, straighten up boundary lines, help get out, say, isolated school sections in the middle of a wilderness area that's never going to be developed. That might have some value to it. And the block to all that has been that, we don't want to necessarily allow our state lands office to do that for whatever reason. So this could be something that this position could take on. And so, I look forward to, working with Mr. Luthi and the governor's office to see how what the possibilities are and what we could do to further Wyoming's interests. Are there any other, I brought up the idea of, state federal land exchanges. Are there any things that are right now just kind of nice to think about, but we haven't got around to, really pursuing because we're so busy putting out fires right now? But what are the other possibilities that might come in mind?
Mr. Luthi?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Boner, again, great ideas. I mean, land exchanges are things that go on for almost, unfortunately for decades as opposed to just for years. But there are also some other policy questions as you move forward, particularly in the environmental area, as we switch, as EPA continues to roll out, long-term regulations. All of that could be a part of this. And just having a position that has been consistent, over a period of time, I see a great value to. And again, I just oppose it. Me being a political animal, I have to say, there's a reason we do change our mind. And usually they are connected with elections because you've had a change of philosophy and someone else, is now running that. And I think that circles back to what I maybe didn't really bring out is as we discuss this legislation, this person probably needs to be accountable to someone. It appears that the intent is to be the governor. So, and maybe, certainly the governor could have, put enough pressure if they wanted a person to leave, that person would leave, just to be honest. But it is, again, kind of a different concept that carries over administrations. So.
Senator Kolb, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I'd like to get back to the unwanted mother-in-law living in the house. I think on that note, I think we're all working for the same goal, and everyone is elected, as we previously discovered. And because of that, I think we're trying to push the same directions. I think this is potentially a tool that will move the state of Wyoming forward in defense, I think, of the majority of folks' view that we are opposed to certain actions taken, and we're trying to figure out a way, and hopefully we can work together. I mean, that's my hope, that we can come up with a way that we can mount a better defense for the state of Wyoming. And that's not disparaging words about what we've currently done. It's just the future seems to be something that we have to look at. And I think this proposed legislation that we're looking in front of us, while not perfect right now, is an effort to try to make the state of Wyoming situation better. And that's not to slight anybody. But I think with that in mind, I'd certainly look forward to hearing any comments you'd have about what we could do to improve this with this concept. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Luthi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've asked some interesting questions, I hope, Senator Kolb. And I will point out, I didn't say unwanted in-laws. I just said in-laws. Okay. So, yeah. So, but no, I'd be more than, willing to work with any of you. This is an initial foray into this. These were my initial impressions after reading the bill. So absolutely, we are all on the same page. We are all pulling in the same direction. So thank you, members of the committee, for bringing this forward so we could have this discussion.
So, Mr. Luthi, we have a position already that's been vacant, a position as state planning coordinator has been vacant for a number of years. Obviously, there's been other priorities for the governor's office during this interim time, but is that criteria for the state planning coordinators so restrictive that you couldn't expand it to include some of these responsibilities that we're envisioning with this proposed legislation. And I guess what I'm saying is, would it be better to go in and amend or modify that position that's already been approved and hopefully is in your budget, rather than create some more legislation? Could we just work with what we have and expand it so that it's not so confined for the governor to be able to utilize?
Mr. Chairman, I would welcome that opportunity to continue that. I just brought you that statute as an example, that there's one sitting out there that we either could pattern it after or we could amend it. I leave that to you, and I'm also open to suggestions.
Other questions? Representative Winter, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Luthi, if I remember correctly, you said that this position that is already there has not been filled. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Winter, that is correct.
Okay, Mike, I follow up.
Yes, please.
Why has that not been filled? If there's there's no sense in us establishing another position if it's not needed, but if it looks to me like it is needed, and so what's the problem that we're not getting action on that right now with the current position?
Mr.
Mr.
Lucy.
Chairman, Representative Winter, you've asked the question I was actually hoping to avoid. And it's not, I think, here is my opinion as I've been in the governor's office for a period of time. The governor took in at a time came in when there's very restricted budgets. And it was his goal that his office would not be, overly large and would be kept, pretty lean and mean. I also mentioned that this position under 91207 is currently under discussion right now within the governor as well. It may very well be, although I can't say, that's not my decision to make, that maybe this position will be filled in the near future.
Follow up, Ms. Representative Winter. Any further questions? Any other questions for the governor's office? Co-Chairman Boner,
Okay,
please.
so, well, at least one more. So the novel concept in this legislation is that, you would have the ability to appoint somebody that be, under the governor's office for 4 years. Certainly, do you think the governor may look at it as an opportunity to extend his decision-making beyond his term and, provide that continuity? And maybe that'd be a good thing from his perspective?
Mr. Luthi.
Mr. Chairman, that's an interesting concept. That's an interesting spin. May I take that under advisement?
Follow up? Mr. Luthi, one more question from me. There's quite a bit of money in this proposal for merit raises and bonuses. Is that something that the governor would enjoy having at his discretion? Or is it something that he is already handling with other avenues and other means?
Mr. Chairman, again, that's a very good question. Again, this is a bit unusual. Normally, bonus decisions, incentive decisions are made at the director level, for those within their agencies. This is a position that appears to allow this appropriation to be used across agencies, which again, governor and ANI all becomes part of that pay band question that you all dealt with this morning. I just think we need some boundaries on this. And that would be one of the amendments that I would suggest that we talk about, of just exactly how that should be used.
Thank you, Mr. Luthi. Any other questions for Mr. Luthi in the governor's office? He's going to go to the back of the room if we let him go. All right. Thank you, Mr. Luthi.
Mr. Chairman, thank you all very much. And I am going to hang around for a while because you guys always
Please
have
do.
interesting things to
Please
talk
do.
about, but thank you.
Within sight.
Within sight, absolutely. Well, I'm pretty short, maybe the back of the room. I am out of sight, but
All right.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Luthi. Any other public comment on 24 LSO 296? Any other public comment? Anything online? Closing public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Co-Chair Boner. Is there a second? Second by Senator Cold. Any discussion? Any amendments? Ruben, or Representative Tarver, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just need to wrap my mind around the goal of this bill, if I recall correctly, was to strengthen our position on a federal pushback, correct? And to allow the governor's office to have another tool at their disposal for this. Is that correct? And for anyone to answer?
Co-Chair Boner.
Yeah, that's the point. I think I kind of described it a little bit earlier. You know, you got a lot of moving parts with these federal agencies. It'd be good to redouble our efforts and have somebody who is responsible for, the primary point of contact, I should say, for ensuring that that policy is as beneficial as possible to the state of Wyoming. And there's a multitude of ways that we can go about doing that.
Representative Tarver, follow up?
I'm just not sure this is gonna get the effect we're wanting, especially if there was already a position available and it wasn't taken advantage of. I don't know if we need to try a different angle I guess I'm just kind of brainstorming here, but it looks like maybe we need to strategize a little differently if we want to have a different outcome from what we already have. And I'm just leave that open-ended.
Senator Cole, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I think the difference in this bill is this is a position. It isn't going to be up to the governor to fill it or not. Right? I mean, what I thought. And then also on this 91207 position that's not currently on that statutory authorization of a position. Why don't we just strike the position then? They're not going to fill it. I don't know what we got. We'll have one hanging out there for. Just remove it. If it's not going to be used, then we can insert that. Frankly, this can be in that place. The level of expertise, or I guess what we're trying to get to, is how you articulated. That's what my thoughts are also. We're trying to give another tool in the toolbox to fight this fight, frankly, to defend the state of Wyoming. So that's my thoughts. I think if we just remove a position that's not being used, I don't know why that's off the table. And then also, I believe maybe I'll stand corrected if someone can help me out with this, but I believe this authorizes a position. It isn't up to the governor to do it or not. It will be a position. That was what I understand. Maybe someone could help me with that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Co-Chair Boner.
Yeah, and then maybe, we're gonna have to work this bill quite a bit. And maybe, if we have a few amendments, that would help clarify a few things. I agree in its current state, it's not ready, but that's why we're here. So, Mr. Chairman, perhaps we'll start on page 2, line 7, after 103 period, insert the coordinator shall be appointed to a 4-year term. So we got the 4-year limitation in there. That clarifies our intent quite a bit.
Line 7?
Yeah.
Chairman?
And certainly, give also leeway to make it work, but I think we do need to specify it's a 4-year term.
Second by Senator Ellis. Any discussion on the proposed amendment? Talise, do you understand where that is? Seeing no discussion, I anticipate a question. Question being called. We're voting on the amendment on line 7 to add that it would be a 4-year term. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Amendment passes.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Ellis.
on page 2, line 7. For discussion, right now it says the coordinator shall not be removed by the governor as provided in 91202, except the coordinator may be removed by the governor for malfeasance or misconduct. I know this is borrowed language from some other positions found in this part of Title IX, but I think my concern is what if this person isn't, malfeasance and misconduct, you have to really egregiously do something bad. If this person is ineffective, doesn't show up for meetings, I think that, you know, is ineffective. That's not malfeasance or misconduct. So I think I'd rather, if we're going to go down this path, just say that the coordinator shall serve at the will of the governor. So that would be my motion. Page 2, line 7, after the word shall, strike not be removed by the governor, and then strike all of line 8 and then most of line 9 to remove that sentence, and then insert the words shall serve at the will of the governor.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second by Co-Chairman Boner. Any discussion?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think that, this does help, I think, because we still have the Senate confirmation. That's kind of the unique part of this. It gives, you know, a little bit of balance here, ensuring that there is some continuity from term to term. And
Senator
certainly
Ellis?
agree with the concerns that Senator Ellis brought up, that, you know, you want to make sure there's a little bit more accountability in the position too.
Yes, thank you. Senator Ellis? Any other? Senator Cole, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could we add in there also, identify every 4 years? That they get confirmed, or confirm that the next, some sort of language in there that won't let it linger over, on a confirmation process to be date certain, that there's a removal, the replacement will be confirmed by the Senate.
Sure.
And I don't know how to actually word, that's probably an LSO question.
Is that a friendly amendment, Senator Ellis?
Mr. Chairman, but I think we should handle that separately.
Okay.
And maybe as a conforming amendment, if my second agrees with this. So it, you know, Senator Boner added the language, be appointed to a 4-year term. So it says the coordinator shall be appointed to a 4-year term and shall serve at the will of the governor. That would be like how it would read, I think, together as one sentence. I understand Senator Kolb's point, but I don't want to confuse this particular. We can tackle that next if you'd like.
Okay. All right, any further discussion? Or are we ready to vote on this amendment? Okay, so we're voting on the amendment, Senator Ellis's amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes. Senator Kolb, you have another amendment?
I do, Mr. Chairman. Wanted to add language that would ratify the fact that any appointment would have to be confirmed by the Senate.
Do I hear a second?
Just that,
Seconded by Senator Ellis. Discussion. Co-Chair Warner.
yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm just wondering if that, I mean, the page 2, line 4 and 5, if that's not covered, the governor shall employ a coordinator with the advice and consent of the Senate, it's not a may. So if they, you know, they get rid of the previous one, they have to get a new one, it's a shall. So I wonder if we're covered there with the current language.
Well,
Senator Kolb.
yeah, just to further that conversation, I thought we were covered with the current statutes that we have. And apparently we're not. So when it comes to confirmation, so that's my concern. I want to make this airtight. That if this person gets confirmed by the Senate, you know, and this obviously in the next legislative session, it would have to be by thinking about this correctly. I just don't want this to become, oh, I'm part of an 8-year, you know, I'm continuing the term as governor. And because of that, that we don't have to have a reconfirmation on said appointment. And I want to make it really clear, and that's, as I said, it's probably an LSO question about how we can word that in there simply to state that it shall be confirmed by the Senate.
Talise, do you have a recommended wording for that, and where would it be?
Mr. Chairman, I was just going to say that how it's written, they will have to be confirmed, but if a vacancy occurs in between the sessions, then the governor has the ability to appoint a temporary appointment if that's what you would like to remove, or exactly what you would like to do about that. But currently as it's written, there is Senate confirmation, and then if only a vacancy occurs in between the sessions, then a temporary appointment is allowed.
Senator Ellis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at line 6 on page 2. After the word Senate, what if we inserted the word annually? With the advice and consent of the Senate annually, comma, in accordance with 2812 and the rest of it. And maybe for LSO. So I was trying to respond to Senator Kolb's desire to keep it simple amendment.
So is
So
that,
that's the motion.
Well, I think, and I like that motion because it keeps it simple. And it also, because this is a position that's really sensitive to the legislative body. And I think it being reviewed is probably a good check on the direction and what is currently going on in that said position.
so do you have that, Talise? Okay. So the motion to amend Senate on line 6, was it 6? Okay. To insert after Senate annually. Any further discussion on that? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Ellis.
a question for my colleagues. Since we're the Federal Natural Resource Committee, I am worried about just the breadth of this. Throughout the bill, it's talking about a coordinator of Wyoming's interests. And I don't know that we really, I think we're getting a little too outside of our lane. So I don't know if we need to clarify that we're talking about our natural resource interests. So some discussion on that. And if that's the case, we probably got an amendment in the works.
Senator Co-Chair Boner.
Well, that was one of my amendments. Well, so, yeah, I would move that we strike coordinator of Wyoming's interests and insert federal natural resource management coordinator. And every time that appears in the bill, it's more than once. Won't go through it list every time, but that's the coolest name I could think of. That's also descriptive of the position. So
Seconded by, motion is by Co-Chair Boner, seconded by Senator Ellis. Any further discussion on adding federal natural resource coordinator in lieu of coordinator? So it would read federal natural resource be inserted before coordinator of Wyoming's interests.
well, and strike of Wyoming interest.
The strike of Wyoming interests, okay.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up, it's in conforming language throughout, like I'm looking at page 2, line 16. Review all federal legislative and administrative acts for impacts to Wyoming's federal natural resource interests. Again, on the bottom of page 2, line 22, overreach into the state and local natural resource interests. So I think it's broader than that. I just want to make that clear to everyone. We probably need to comb through this, not right now, but LSO, if we're doing a conceptual amendment, to make sure we've got all of those covered.
Thank you, Senator Ellis. Any further discussion? All those in favor of this amendment of Co-Chair Boner's amendment, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passed. Next amendment. Let's go down here to Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to, I don't know the wording we'd use, but as Senator Kolb indicated, maybe we need to get rid of that other position that already exists. So however we can word that to accomplish that effect.
Co-Chair Boner.
And the way I understood that, there's two provisions of statute, 9-1.207 and 209. It appeared to me that, 209 is currently titled Coordinator of State and Federal Relations. And that would be something we'd be looking at striking, especially considering the testimony here from the governor's office that they're considering filling the 207 position. And so, yeah, I'll make that motion to delete 9-1-209. Repeal, excuse me. Repeal.
Seconded by Senator Ellis. So we would have a repealer in there. Elise, you got that? Okay, the motion is to repeal 9-1-207.
No,
which
209.
Or 209, I'm sorry, 9-1-209. That is currently vacant Any further discussion on that? Let's go ahead and vote then. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any other amendments? Co-chairman Boner, please.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that we add in the a list of responsibilities starting on page 2, line 15. At Allison's discretion, add the responsibility to pursue land exchanges between the state and federal government.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Senator Cole. Discussion? Let's go to the bringer of the amendment.
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, and so the idea here is to, acknowledging that there's, it takes a long time to get these exchanges done, but looking to Utah's example, they do they've consistently got these exchanges put into legislation at the federal level, which circumvents a lot of that process and gets those land exchanges actually accomplished. And I'm unaware of, similar efforts in this state. So this would help solve a longstanding issue. And I think probably one of the more important things that this office could do. It would make the biggest difference. So off the bat is to actually get some of these exchanges done that we've been talking about for years. We just haven't gotten around to helping them.
Thank you, Chairman Boner. Senator Ellis, please.
Mr. Chairman, just, I'd like to see the language, so if the senator could repeat it. I just want to make sure I understand that the intent matches what the insertion would be.
Mr. Chairman, pursue land exchanges between the state and federal governments.
And that would be on line,
Page 2, line 18, add in a new paragraph 2 and renumber the other paragraphs.
Elise, do you have that? Any further comments about that proposed amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of Senator or Co-Chairman Boner's proposed amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Okay. So that amendment passes. Any further discussion? Co-Chairman Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on page 3, line 5, I think this is a response to the testimony we heard from the governor's office about having some sort of coordination with administering the incentive program. I think that's well taken. So perhaps we could consider inserting on page 3, line 5, after employees with the approval of the governor and in consultation with the affected agency director.
Okay. Would you repeat that wording again?
Okay. Page 3, line 5, insert with the approval of the governor in consultation with the affected agency director.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Senator Cole. Any discussion on this? On Senator Boner's proposed amendment?
Question.
Question being called. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Co-Chairman Boner, you have any further amendments? Anyone else? Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just keep coming back to the word protect on line 2. I don't know if there's a way to be more clear in our intent. If this employee does exactly what to protect, because I think employees have, little authority to, usually have to get approval from a boss or a director to really effectuate a change. So are we looking for someone who raises an issue and runs it up the flagpole? This word protect just seems really unclear to me, and I don't know what this is hoping to accomplish.
Do you have a proposed language? Senator Cole, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, how about substitute protect to defend? They're trying to categorize it more tightly, or yes, express what it is.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator?
I'm trying to get away from something that's subjective. What does it mean to defend? I read a regulation in the Federal Register. I tell my boss about it. That's really all I can do, but they're trying to maybe, that's the kind of stuff I'm getting at. I just really want to understand what that means. If that's enough, that you read something that's coming, or you were at a meeting and heard something and you report it to your boss. I'm just trying to understand it. I'm guessing at everything, so.
Chairman Boner, please.
Yeah, so I was mostly thinking about the discussion we had with the Attorney General's office, when, and, you have a few attorneys doing really important work, and that was kind of a spinoff from that discussion. So that's the intent. If it helps to have some sort of bonus or incentive program to make sure we retain highly qualified people to do that sort of work, that was the intent here. Now, certainly, there's going to be some discretion on the part of whoever's doing this. And this is a serious discussion to have. Are you going to allow the ability to circumvent a process which is very well defined? It's meant to be fair to everybody, right? And we're going to, have somebody with the ability to sort of go around that with the hopes of having more flexibility. But yeah, certainly it'd be a big change for sure. So that's the intent. Whether we get there or not, I guess it's up to the committee.
Senator Ellis? Senator Cole, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this allows the governor's office latitude. I think it opens up, because it is a political process and it is a political decision on how you prioritize things. And this absolutely allows flexibility. And you're right, it is not really defined super tightly, but it allows the governor to exercise his authority when it comes to this world. So I think in this case, typically, I would most likely agree with Senator Ellis's point of view, but in this particular case, it grants latitude, and I think that's what we want, because it is a cooperative situation where we're trying to get something done to deal with issues for the state of Wyoming. So I frankly, I think we got to trust the governor, at least to having some latitude to make those choices. Thank you.
Any other comments from the committee? Chairman Boner, please.
And one more, not sure if we need an amendment or not, but it might be helpful to have a non-codified section that stipulates how this would work, the timing wise, with the first appointment, whether we want that 4-year term to start at a certain date or upon, Senate confirmation and the, I guess be the 2025 general session. We may want to specify that just to say, what the timing is for the first person that's going to be appointed to this. So I guess I'll go ahead and make that motion. Add section 3. It'd say that, the governor can appoint immediately and the term will start upon Senate confirmation in the 2025 general session.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Senator Cole. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of Co-Chairman Boner's proposed amendment signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes. Any other comments by the committee? We have a pretty good markup at this point. Elise, do you feel comfortable? You got all this? Okay. I sense a question. Do I hear a question? Question being called. This is a roll call vote for 24 LSO 296 as amended.
Senator Ellis,
No.
Senator Cole,
Aye.
Representative Tarver,
Aye.
Representative Winter, Co-Chairman Boner,
Aye.
Chairman Heiner.
Aye.
That passes.
Thank you. And I think we should still continue to work with the governor's office. There may be some things that we can adjust before session that as we look at the two, the positions that you're currently looking at filling and whether, this is overlap to those things.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please,
Prob-
Senator.
Probably just worth mentioning that the title really has to contemplate that repealer. So title change, that's a conforming amendment, but I just want to really flag that. I
That's a
don't
good
wanna-
point. Thank you.
miss that later on.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the next bill, 24 LSO 121, mineral royalties, proportional severance tax refunds. And we'll start by the LSO introducing the bill for us.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Talise Hansen, LSO. I am presenting Bill Draft 24 LSO 121, Mineral Royalties Proportional Severance Tax Refunds. This bill draft was considered at the October meeting and the committee adopted an amendment that I'll highlight as I go through the bill draft. This bill draft establishes severance tax refunds for specified oil, gas, and coal severance taxes based on increased federal mineral royalty rates. Page 2 amends Wyoming Statute 94601 by creating a new subsection O. Subsection O provides that beginning calendar year 2025 and each year thereafter, the state treasurer shall transfer federal mineral royalty rate revenues to the severance tax distribution account. Paragraph 1 provides that there should be a transfer in amount equal to the funds necessary to provide the severance tax refunds authorized. Paragraph 2 provides that the amount calculated to provide the severance tax refunds shall then be multiplied by 16.67%. This amount shall be added to the funds transferred under this subsection and separately distributed in accordance with the current severance tax distribution described in Wyoming Statute 3914-801B through E. Paragraph 3 requires that the transfer of the amount equal to the reduced ad valorem taxable value that results from any increase in the federal mineral royalty rate percentage and the proposed severance tax refunds multiplied by the established mill levies be distributed to the county treasurers. Paragraph 4 requires the Department of Revenue to certify to the state treasurer the funds necessary to provide the severance tax refunds and the distributions described in paragraphs 1 through 3. Page 4 amends Wyoming Statute 3913-111 by adding a new subsection E to provide that the Department of Revenue shall calculate the amount to be distributed to the county treasurers, which was discussed previously. Pages 5 through 9 provides refunds to certain taxpayers for a portion of the severance taxes paid. The refunds begin with mineral production taking place on and after January 1st, 2025. Page 5, paragraph 4 provides refunds for taxpayers for a portion of the severance taxes paid on surface coal mined from the federal mineral estate or paid on underground coal mined from the federal mineral estate. Page 7, paragraph 4 provides refunds for taxpayers for a portion of the severance taxes paid on crude oil or natural gas produced from the federal mineral estate. The refund shall be an amount equal to the amount of any cumulative increase in the federal mineral royalty rate percentage in place as of July 1st, 2021, imposed under federal law multiplied by the state of Wyoming's gross percentage share, 50%, after deducting the mandatory administrative costs imposed. That amount would then be multiplied by 75% to approximate and account for the reduced assessed mineral values resulting from the increase in the federal mineral royalty rate percentage. The refund amount shall not exceed the total annual severance tax liability for the taxpayer. The burden is on the taxpayer to establish the amount of any refund. The taxpayer shall apply for the refund authorized annually on or before July 1st of the year immediately following the year of mineral production on a form prescribed by the department. Part of the new amendment from the October meeting is found on page 7, subparagraph E, which provides that as part of the application required and as a condition of receiving any refund, the taxpayer shall complete an affidavit affirming under penalty of perjury that the taxpayer agrees to spend or expend any refund received on ongoing coal operations in the state of Wyoming. The same amendment is made on page 9, subparagraph E. The only difference is that it requires the taxpayer to agree to spend or expend any refund received on ongoing oil and gas operations in the state of Wyoming. The amendment discussed in October is also located on page 7, subparagraph G, to provide that the taxpayer shall spend or expend any refund on ongoing coal operations in the state of Wyoming. The taxpayer shall report to the Department of Revenue and the Department of Environmental Quality annually on or before July 1st of the year immediately following the year the taxpayer received the refund, describing how the taxpayer spent or expended the refund. The same amendment is made on page 9, subparagraph G. The only difference is that it requires the taxpayer to spend or expend any refund on ongoing oil and gas operations in the state, and it requires the taxpayer to report to the Department of Revenue and the Wyoming Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. Page 10 amends Wyoming Statute 39-14-801 to provide that funds transferred into the severance tax distribution account to provide for the severance tax refunds, and the distribution shall be accounted for separately and are continuously appropriated to the Department of Revenue for funding the refunds and distributions. This subsection also provides a reporting requirement beginning September 1st, 2026, and on September 1st of each year thereafter. The Department of Revenue shall annually report to the Joint Revenue Interim Committee on the number of refund applicants and the number and amounts of refunds provided, and the amounts separately accounted for and distributed. Section 2 on page 11 provides that the Department of Revenue, the Department of Environmental Quality, and the Wyoming Oil and Gas Conservation Commission shall promulgate all rules necessary to implement the provision of this act. Section 3 on page 11 provides an appropriation of $368,000 from the general fund to the Department of Revenue for purposes of implementing this act. Section 4 on page 12 provides an effective date of January 1st, 2025 for Section 1 and an immediate effective date for Sections 2, 3, and 4. And I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Hanson? So the LSO sent us a fiscal note, resent that this morning. It's from last year, I believe. Is that correct, Elise? So that should be in your inbox from this morning. Okay, we have the Department of Revenue. Thank you for being here. Please state your name for the record, and you can please proceed.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair. I'm Craig Grenvik, I'm the Administrator of the Mineral Tax Division. I'll start by apologizing by not having Director Henson here. She is otherwise busy with the Revenue Committee this afternoon and this morning. So, just have to bear with me, I guess, one more time. A lot of moving parts in this bill, no question. The department really doesn't have any questions on how to calculate the moving pieces, who's supposed to get what from where. I think we've hashed that out through the last legislative session. Obviously, our only questions that we have at this point would be regarding the verification process. Obviously, we have an affidavit and then follow up again the next year to make sure that those refunds had actually been expended that way. The department currently does not have any access, any means to verify expenditures in the industry, whether it be oil and gas or coal. We don't have an income tax to rely upon. Some other agencies' forms or that were in the department, we do not have that. There are maybe some issues concerning timing as well. They may sign the affidavit that they're going to expend, but then maybe they sell their properties in the current year, and so the refund would be more than the operations that they actually did expend them on. We would know at the time of issuing the refunds whether they had filed severance returns and had paid on those given properties up to that point of the year, but after that we would not know. Maybe the definition of operations, there's some uncertainty as to what what we need to be looking for, what we need to be requesting specifically from the operators. From our standpoint, we only deal with operators and take-in-kind owners. That's who we would be giving the refund back to. So there's only two type of entities that we would be requesting the information from. We wouldn't be requesting information from working interest owners that had not reported their taxes. That simplifies, our administrative efforts, and also simplifies it for those working interest owners who do not report anything currently on those properties to us. Other than those questions, maybe giving a little more guidance to the department. We understand the concepts of what we're being asked to do, but the exact details we do not have fleshed out just yet. The other thing I guess I would note is that I don't know what other questions or what detail maybe the DEQ has for this committee regarding this bill. I don't know if they've responded or not. I kind of feel like I threw their name out of the hat and kind of thrown another agency under the bus maybe a little bit. But hopefully they have some input on this as well. I believe the Oil and Gas Commission representative is here to respond to their questions regarding the bill. With that, I will stand for any questions.
All right, thank you. Any questions for the Department of Revenue? Chairman Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that, the concept we came up with here is for an affidavit, right? That they would stipulate that they're going to be expending the refund and within the state of Wyoming. And it's my understanding that you rely on the operators to report quite a bit of information. Is that correct? And I mean, so how does that work currently? If they say we're going to pay X amount in severance tax, are you actively verifying every last bit of severance tax that comes in, or is that something where you're relying on the operator to report that?
Yes, we have Mr. Chairman. Yes, we do have a self-reporting system here, and we do rely upon, the attestations of the producers at the time they report it. Obviously, the Department of Audit has the ability to audit them for a number of years after the fact.
All right. So the
follow-up?
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Chairman. So what we've come up with here is something that I believe is similar in that, there's definitely that audit function that, is a necessary part of it, but it's not as if I just hope that we can apply the same level of scrutiny to this concept that we have of making sure that refunds are expended in Wyoming as we do with everything else associated with, mineral development in the state of Wyoming. And that's kind of the goal. So I hope, does that help clarify our intent a little bit, or?
Mr. Grenvik?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, yes, I don't believe the audit function is explicit in this bill, but I believe everybody involved thinks it's implicit. And if that needs to be further verified or further included in the bill, that might be a good idea.
Very good. Thank you.
Mr. Grenvik, the fiscal note looks like a lot of the information came from you in this last year's bill, 162. But in that fiscal policy notes, it says that the decrease in revenue could eventually reach approximately $120 million per year. What part of the state budget would be affected by that decrease in revenue of $120 million a year under this proposed legislation?
Mr. Chairman, the department did not generate the number for the amount of that decrease. We basically provided the amount of additional money we need from our IT vendor, but I do believe the entities that are impacted by the severance tax distributions would be impacted by this decrease.
And could you tell us what those entities are on a high level range?
I believe it's It was in the 800 section. I apologize, Mr. Chairman, I'll look this up.
So if you want to phone a friend, I got someone here is raising his hand. Mr. Chairman
Okay.
Boner.
All right, so thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess we didn't go over this again, but the idea here is that, you know, we basically, if we don't do anything, we see an increase in FMRs and a decrease in severance tax and ad valorem. And so what this bill does is effectively would transfer, you know, would make those accounts whole. So you would effectively the bill is you move funds from FMR account to severance tax account. Also, you have a mechanism for making those local entities whole through with ad valorem, but then the state's portion of the increase is also refunded to the affected taxpayer. So the effect is the bill itself is to transfer money from FMRs to severance tax and back to affected local entities based off ad valorem. At the end, if we do nothing, that's made the decision for us to just increase FMRs. And so that's the whole purpose of the bill is that I believe that the Wyoming legislature should continue to have robust discussion about how those, you know, how much to put into each account, because there's different constituencies that depend on FMRs versus severance taxes. I just don't think it's right to have the federal government make that decision for us.
So my follow-up question, Mr. Grenvik, is this will affect our local government, which we would probably need to keep them whole. And I was just wondering who that would affect and how much do you think that would be? That the state would have to backstop?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. That backfill to the local entities would be out of the federal mineral royalties.
And do you have any idea how much that could be? If the projection is a revenue reduction of $120 million, how much would that need to be backfilled to the local government?
I believe 0.1667% of that.
So not very much then.
Well, that's a relative term. That's a lot of money to me individually, yes, but
What was the number again?
I believe it's the 16 2/3%.
The 16%.
yeah.
Okay, all right. Senator,
So, Mr. Chairman, I mean, 16% of 120 million is
it's quite a bit.
It's quite a bit.
Any other questions for Mr. Grenvik, State Revenue Office? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members.
Wyoming Oil and Gas Commission.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Joe Scott with Wyoming Oil and Gas Commission. Pleasure to be here today to talk to you about this bill. Just a couple clarifying questions related to our role in this bill. One is the definition of oil and gas operations. I'm assuming from discussion, this is related to drilling and completion, like forward development activities. The only other place I know that this exact term is defined in statute is in the Split Estate Act, where it means the whole raft of activities from a first stake in the ground to last blade of grass grown. So some clarity around what the definition of that would be good. I heard the Department of Revenue talk about time scale. I'm assuming reading the bill that the implied intent is that those operations would have to occur in the year following when they would have qualified, the taxpayer would have qualified. So in some cases, they will, as alluded to, be certifying future operations, particularly on a July 1 date. The highest level of drilling, especially for people who are drilling shorter well programs, is going to be from August to November, just regulatory and weather. And so if something happens there's a potential that somebody in good faith would say that they were going to expend those, but then wouldn't end up doing that because they sold, price tanked, or federal permits didn't come through, whatever the host of issues could be. There's also a consideration about take in kinds. So a take in kind taxpayer might not be an operator with the commission, may not be the one actually drilling a well. So one of the other questions was, if somebody is expending those funds as a non-op, I'm assuming that would count. I don't see that the Oil and Gas Commission is certifying where these funds went. And so you'd be relying on an affidavit. We rely on affidavits every day. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying if the commission would have a hard time certifying where some of these funds went. And I'm also assuming that the group of working interest owners in a well is being judged by the taxpayer or the operator, however that may work out in the particular situation. Meaning that the taxpayer can only certify what they're going to do with their portion of the refund, and it seems like it would be some trouble to certify what everybody else did if the taxpayer was not 100% working interest, which is often the case. So I guess those would be our thoughts on, or maybe some better clarity on how we can help get this across the finish line. With that, I'd stand for questions.
All right, thank you. Any questions for the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission? Co-Chairman Owner, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it looks like the language you have the most questions about is on page 11, paragraph starting on line 6. Is that right, where you have to, there's some sort of verification there on the part of the Oil and Gas Commission, and so would but then you also stated that you're relying on affidavits for a lot of things.
We do.
Perhaps it would just be a little bit easier to strike that paragraph then.
You could certainly.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Any other questions for the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission? Seeing none, thank you very much for your time and for being here. Now we'll open it up for public comments. Are there any, Governor's office? Would you go? Okay. Let's hear from the Petroleum Association. I'm sorry, Mr. I tried to do pecking order.
No apology necessary, Mr. Chairman. Pete Obermueller, Petroleum Association of Wyoming. Nice to see the committee. So first of all, we've been at this particular effort for a long time. And I want to say first, just as the outset, everyone on this committee has been very, very helpful in exploring and fleshing out our various challenges with the federal government. I just want to thank this committee and each one of you individually for that in the various ways you've done that. I think Co-Chairman Boner, I just want to single you out in particular, your efforts at forging a relationship with the BLM and with the federal government on all of these issues has really been outstanding. And I think you need to be thanked for that, regardless of what happens with this. You've worked really hard at this on behalf of your constituents in Wyoming, and you just deserve that acknowledgement. Getting back to the bill, Mr. Chairman, thanks for that digression. We support the bill, and I think it's worthy of sort of stepping back and reminding everyone where this all started and what we're talking about here, because it's highlighted in Chairman Heiner's question about the fiscal note, which the fiscal note is pretty misleading because the fiscal note starts from a higher baseline. The federal government has already increased our royalties and fees and hurdles, et cetera, but they've increased our royalties. And so what the bill contemplates doing is not reducing Wyoming's revenue by that amount from the pre-Fed action baseline. We still, our royalties and fees are going up regardless of whether this bill passes or not. The question that this bill tries to answer is, the question this bill asks is it a worthwhile policy to use Wyoming's share of that to try to ease that federal burden a little bit? And it is a little bit, because it's only that delta and only on these forward-looking leases that are part of this, the increase in the royalty rate. So, so the purpose is not, it's in terms of the backfill and all of that. Severance tax, of course, as Senator Kolb knows, doesn't really go to local government except for in very small amounts under the cap. So it's really all the state side, and then the federal mineral royalty side, taking that state share and putting it into an account that helps refund the ad valorem loss to school districts, not to local governments, but to school districts, and then also provide for this possible refund. So that's the policy consideration. Now, I understand that the paragraphs added about expending the refund in Wyoming, that was a good faith attempt by Representative Stith to try to somehow convince the juggernaut that is the House Appropriations Committee that this is a good policy. But I respectfully, Mr. Chairman, I would argue that is a contortion too far for even to move in this bill for a number of reasons. Number one, in terms of investing in Wyoming, this is a refund based on a current effort in Wyoming. So the expenditure is already happening in order for it to come back. So it's the taxpayers' money refunded to them. And what this says is that state government is going to say, here's how you're going to spend your money. That's a little bit of a bridge too far, number one. But even if you can get across that bridge, we all know that money is fungible. So it's symbolic at best in terms of how an operator is going to decide what to do with the money that they are refunded on this. Third, I've long thought of this bill as a bill that it would be primarily helpful to smaller or mid-sized companies that decide to have a drilling program where royalty increases like this can be material. But if they're looking at this legislation saying once a year I have to apply for this, and then I subject myself to perjury if somebody else in the organization spends $1 elsewhere, I don't know that anyone would even apply anymore for this with that in there. So, Mr. Chairman, I understand the hurdles to this bill. You and I both know that it has a long road, and we have tried mightily to convince people that in a state where the legislature has repeatedly over and over again, and I can't thank you enough that you said we're taxing oil and gas enough. We're not going to tax them more, except if somebody else does it. The feds do it, then we're happy to accept it. So I keep trying to try to make that case. It hasn't won out yet. So certainly support the underlying bill, but it's difficult for me to accept those amendments, even though I know it's a good faith effort by Representative Stith to try to move something forward. So, Mr. Chairman, I would suggest striking those requirements, moving the bill forward, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Obermueller. Any questions for the Petroleum Association? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Any other public testimony? Any other public testimony on proposed mineral royalties, proportional severance tax refunds? Anybody online? All right, we'll be closing the public testimony portion. Committee, what's your directive?
Bill?
Move the bill by Senator Ellis,
Second.
seconded by Co-Chair Boner. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Co-Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. I think that, that testimony we heard is, I find it compelling. I've always kind of appreciate the more detailed reasons for striking the condition that be spent in Wyoming, but it's, I think we got a very, I guess, realistic assessment of our ability to do so. And, once again, I dare somebody to say that somehow the oil and gas industry doesn't contribute enough to the state of Wyoming in general. So, I think all this is going to be on the table as it goes through the process. Also, just being very transparent. I don't like negotiating against myself anyways in this process. So, I'll move that we strike on page 7, line 10, paragraph E. Page 10, line 15, paragraph E. Page 11, line 6, paragraph G. And I believe that would take care of the new provisions that we had.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Ellis.
I think we missed one on page
I'm
8.
sure I did.
Page 8, line, paragraph G.
Okay, very good. Thank you. That too.
So 3 locations?
No, 4.
4 locations. Okay, do I have a second for that amendment? Second by Senator Ellis. This is any discussion on this proposed amendment? To strike the affidavit that the dollars refunded have to be spent in Wyoming. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those in oppose signify. Thank you. That amendment pass. Any further discussion? Mr. Co-Chair.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I probably should have done this at the beginning, but I think this is an important policy consideration for our colleagues that, you know, if the rough math is right, this would be the equivalent of us, voting to raise the severance tax by about 1.5% if we do nothing. So a no vote is basically effectively, making it more difficult to do business in the state of Wyoming for one of our most important industries. I think that we owe that industry a little bit of stability. And we owe our state agencies and our local government stability as well. So I think it's really important we move this bill forward and make that decision, as uncomfortable as it may make some folks in in this process. I think we do have to have a say in this, and we should have a say in it. So urgent I vote.
All right, thank you. Senator Ellis.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not prepared to offer amendments, but I think we heard some important testimony today from the Department of Revenue and the Wyoming Oil and Gas Conservation Commission about some of our implicit desires, the ability to audit and some of those things. So I just would hope that, if this bill advances, that maybe we look at some serious amendments to kind of answer those questions. I'm just not prepared to do it right now on the fly, but I do think this might need just a little bit more fine tuning.
All right, thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none. Do I hear for a question? Question being called. Although this is a roll call vote.
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote to sponsor 24 LSO 121 mineral royalties proportional severance tax refunds as amended. Senator Ellis.
Aye.
Senator Kolb.
Aye.
Representative Tarver. Representative Winter. Co-Chairman Boner.
Aye.
Chairman Heiner.
No.
That passes.
All right. That passes. We'll move on to our final piece of legislation to be considered is 24 LSO 344 Natural Resource Protection Act. Chairman Boner, this is where you get to take the mic.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Appreciate LSO's flexibility in this. After reviewing one of the bills that we had at the end of our morning session, I thought it'd be prudent to try to get at this concept of what we heard from the Sweetwater County Sheriff at our last meeting, where in the circumstance, say where clearly at some point in the Rock Springs Resource Management Plan, there is a contemplation of shutting down significant amounts of BLM administered roadways. And I think the response we heard from Sweetwater County was that that was kind of a bridge too far for local law enforcement. So this is a attempt to support that decision. It's based off a bill which the legislature has already passed, the Second Amendment Preservation Act. Senator Hicks had passed that bill a few years ago. And so this is a different variation on that theme based off something that the legislature has already considered. So it's, I think, helps with some of the separation of powers issues that we heard about this morning, and that it is focused on the power of the purse the legislature has. And really the meat of the bill is starting on page 4, where that, if the governor and with the advice of the attorney general believes that an executive order or rule of regulation does not comply with federal laws regarding federal land management, that he would have the ability to basically let the federal government go ahead and enforce that without any cooperation from state or local entities. So that's the idea behind the bill. I also can go through it in more detail, but like I said, I felt that it was prudent to have something that has been considered before in the legislature and just trying to apply it to the circumstance we find ourselves in currently.
Okay, thank you, Co-Chairman Boner, for the introduction. Ms. Hanson, would you please lead us through the bill?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Talise Hanson, LSO, presenting Bill Draft 24 LSO 344, National Resource Protection Act. This bill draft was requested by Chairman Boner, as he mentioned, based on Wyoming's Second Amendment Preservation Act found in Wyoming Statute 914-201 through 914-203. This bill draft prohibits the enforcement of federal rules or regulations regarding federal land management. Section 1 on page 2 creates Wyoming statutes 914-301 through 914-303. Wyoming statute 914-301 provides a short title by stating this article shall be known and may be cited as the Natural Resource Protection Act. The staff comment on page 2 highlights that the committee may wish to consider narrowing the name of the act to the State Natural Resource Protection Act. Wyoming statute 914-302 provides a declaration of authority and policy. Subsection A states that the Natural Resource Protection Act is enacted under the authority of the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution and Wyoming's agreement with the United States when it joined the Union under the United States Constitution system of dual sovereignty. Subsection B provides legislative findings. The staff comment on the bottom of page 3 highlights that the committee may wish to consider removing the phrase historic land management practices from paragraph 3 of the legislative findings, as it's unclear whether the federal government is required to abide by historic land management practices. Wyoming statute 914-303 starts on page 4. Subsection A provides that upon a determination by the governor with advice from the Attorney General that an executive order, rule, or regulation of the federal government does not comply with federal laws regarding federal land management, and upon providing notice, this state and all political subdivisions of the state shall not use any personnel, funds appropriated by the legislature, or any other source of funds that originate within the state of Wyoming to enforce, administer, or coordinate with that federal executive order, rule, or regulation. The governor shall not review a valid agreement with a federal agency for the state to assume primacy over regulation and enforcement of a federal law or program until a court of competent jurisdiction determines the federal executive order, rule, or regulation is unlawful. The staff comment on page 5 highlights the committee may wish to consider who decides that our federal executive order, rule, or regulation does not comply with federal law. It could be the court, the governor as written, the attorney general, or some other party. The committee may wish to also consider specifying the applicable federal laws regarding federal land management. Subsection B provides that nothing in this act shall limit or restrict a public officer as defined by Wyoming statute 65101A5 from providing assistance to federal authorities for purposes not specifically identified in subsection A of this section. Nothing in this act shall be construed to prohibit any governmental entity from accepting federal funds for law enforcement purposes. Subsection C provides a penalty. It states that any public officer who knowingly violates subsection A of this section is guilty of a misdemeanor, punishable by imprisonment for not more than 1 year, a fine of not more than $2,000, or both. Section 2 provides an effective date of July 1st, 2024, and I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Hanson. Any questions for LSO? Chairman Boner?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a brief explanation of that last sentence, starting on page 4, line 16. Just a little bit more explanation as to why that's in there, what's it trying to achieve. It's dealing with primacy primarily, if I remember correctly, but just a little bit more discussion there.
Mr. Chairman, that came up in review, just stating that the state sometimes has primacy over certain federal programs that we're the enforcement agency of those programs. So it's just stating that we're going to continue enforcing those federal programs until a court determines that that is unlawful.
All right, follow up. Any other questions for LSO on this bill? Senator Cole, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question on how this may relate to WyoLink and the truncated interoperative use of the WyoLink system. while we're dealing with BLM using such communications, would they be precluded? I mean, would they be excluded from using that system if the governor so made an order that for an issue in this proposed bill? Would they be, I guess, not be able to use WildLink under certain circumstances?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb. I am not sure I know the answer to your question. I'm not an expert on WildLink and how that would interplay with this.
There might be someone else we want to ask that question, Senator Cole. Okay, let's open it up for public comment then. Anyone care to come forward for public? Mr. Magagna, please. Always a pleasure to have you in our committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and this is certainly something we would support. I might say that.
Would you state your name? For
Oh,
the
I'm
record,
sorry,
please?
Mr. Chairman, Jim McGagnon, the Wyoming Stockholders Association. I was just reflecting on the fact that had this bill been offered 6 months ago, I probably likely could have said, well, why do we really need this? After seeing the Rock Springs RMP, my perspective has changed significantly. And I think there is a place for something like this, for the statement it makes and the position it puts the state in. So we would be very supportive. I would have a couple of questions, I guess, just specifics. On page 3, there's reference to managing federal lands under principles of multi-use sustained yield. That certainly applies to BLM land, but for example, it doesn't apply to state parks or wildlife refuges, whether some clarification might be needed there. So that it's not appearing we're trying to apply it where we agree it shouldn't apply. Maybe might be helpful. And then the only other question I had is more of a technical one, but on page 4, the sentence beginning on line 16, the governor shall not review a valid agreement. Should that perhaps say shall not revoke a valid agreement or enter into a valid agreement? I don't understand the review part. If it's a new one, perhaps, but if we've got an existing agreement based on primacy, to say he can't review it doesn't quite sound right to me, but it certainly would say he wouldn't revoke it unless there was a determination by a court of competent jurisdiction or whomever that may be. So I just throw that out for your consideration, Mr. Chairman. But with that, I think this is a part of a process that we need to engage in to deliver a message to the federal government today, and unfortunately, but would be supportive of this bill moving forward. Please take any questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Magagna. Any questions for Senator Ellis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think Mr. Magagna is raising the questions I have. On page 4, we talk about does not comply with federal laws regarding federal land management. And then we talk about primacy, which are more like not Endangered Species Act, more like Clean Air, Clean Water, EPA acts versus things that are kind of in the universe of BLM, Forest Service. And so I think I'd feel better about this if we were a little clearer in saying, obviously there's concern about the Rock Springs RMP that's promulgated through, specific laws that regulate the BLM. So I'm just wondering if Mr. Magagna has contemplated a way to maybe tailor that to say, FLPMA or the NIFMA, is that right? The National Forest Management Act. And then to some degree, the ESA, because that can affect land use, but maybe restrain from trying to bring in some concepts of clean air, clean water, because I don't think that's what we're quite getting after. So have you given that thought of how we can maybe tailor this a little bit?
Mr.
Chairman,
Magagna.
Senator Ellis, I have, and I guess the question I would want answered before I would have a firm answer is, are we wanting to just focus on BLM lands? And if so, would make sense to state lands managed by the Bureau of Land Management, and then certainly FLPMA, NEPA, Endangered Species Act, Taylor Grazing Act, I would include that one from our perspective on that list as well. And there may be one or two others. I'd have to give that some more thought. If we're wanting to include Forest Service lands as well, then that brings up another list of specific legislation that would need to be referenced. So I'm not sure what the intent here is. Obviously, the immediate need that's driving this is BLM lands. But whether you want to be broader than that, I would defer to the committee.
Follow up? All right. Co-Chairman Boner, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think that those points are well taken, and it could be, just looking at it as simple as adding language on page 4, line 10, after federal land management, including then listing the, FLTMA, whatever the, whatever the laws or, similar follow-on laws, so we have a little bit of flexibility there. But that may be an area that the committee wants to, focus attention on. That's at least what, kind of popped up in my review of the bill. Would that sound adequate to you, Mr. McGagnon?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Boner, I think that's a good way to approach it. I guess the other area that comes to mind, are we only talking about surface management? Do we need to include laws relating to oil and gas leasing, for example? I'm not sure how far you want to go with this. It can get pretty broad very quickly.
Any other questions for Mr. McGagnon?
There's one concern.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one concern. I mean, this is essentially turning the governor into a judge. Right now, if a federal agency issues a, executive order or takes some kind of action, then we wait for the final decision and then people can run to the courts. And then they look at all these laws and they make that determination. This would create another step. The governor gets to make that choice, essentially acts like the judge. And so, I mean, I understand that, but I am a little concerned of how those two branches of government then are working together when we have, people waiting for a court to act. And then along those lines, I get a little nervous because this doesn't make it clear when the governor and attorney general can make these decisions. Right now we've got the Rock Springs RMP. It hasn't been finalized. And so you could say, well, this is premature for any, under law, it's premature to sue. But here it's, I just worry that all of a sudden then we're going to say, the governor could maybe say, oh, we're not going to enforce laws without anything being final. So I'm just a little concerned about how the branches of government work together. Do you have any of those concerns?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis, a couple of thoughts. One certainly is that, and Rock Springs RMP perhaps is a good example. While we don't have any legal basis today because there hadn't been a final decision, there may in fact be some procedural matters upon which litigation could be initiated without waiting for a final decision. Did they go through the proper processes under NEPA, in particular, under the couple of other federal acts with regards to the processes for developing a resource management plan? So that's one possibility there. The only other thought I would have is that because the judicial process is so slow, before you get to the point that you have a final decision, and then unless you can get the court to grant a stay, you're having to live with that decision in Wyoming until you go through a very lengthy judicial process. So I'm wondering if there isn't some value here in saying, the final determination rests with the court. We're not denying that. We're not refusing to accept the decision of the court, but we're saying in the meantime, this provides a process so that we're not implicitly helping to enforce something that we believe was done out of compliance with federal law, even though it would be the law until the court had overturned it. So I understand the concern, but I think there's a place for this narrow process as sort of an interim process, perhaps.
Good. Okay, any other comments? Senator Kolb.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess a little clarification at this point. I thought the impetus of this bill would be that we were not going to cooperate with federal agencies in using state resources for purposes, say, of enforcement or incarceration or just in general, not using our state resources. And that's a court decision that we decide that we're not gonna, use our state monies to aid the federal government in an action that the governor in this case feels is improper. The example, I guess, would be the Sweetwater County Sheriff saying, I'm not gonna, have my officers go out, my deputies go out there and do anything that aids said BLM in any of these actions, say some ticket for trespass or whatever it may be, and not use the county jails. So why isn't that within our ability to say we don't like state funds or state resources to be used to help the federal government do things in the way that I just spoke of? So are we not allowed to do that? I mean, maybe I'm just asking an open-ended question for more learned folks, but I assume we could.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Kolb, I would certainly think you could, but as I read this bill, the way it's drafted, it says this is a executive order, rule, or regulation does not comply with federal laws. So in this case, we may not like it, but I'm assuming here that the governor has to make a determination based on a belief with the advice of the Attorney General that he can defend this as not complying with federal law. And that's maybe a step beyond what you had envisioned with your comments of just saying we don't think it's a good rule, so we're not going to help enforce it.
Any other discussion? Co-Chairman Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so in my mind, that's not the provision that stipulates that what Senator Kolb just pointed out. That'd be a little bit further down of that, that we should not use any personnel funds appropriate by the legislature to help out with that particular rule. And so it seems to me that the intent of the bill is still pretty well intact there on lines 12 through 15, more or less. Is there something we should change to better accomplish that intent?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Bonner, I don't think there's anything needs to change. I'm just, as I read the entire, from line 7 through line 15, you can do all of those things, but it all originates from a determination by the governor that it's in violation of federal law. I mean, he's not making the court's decision, but if he determines that in his view, for that and that of the Attorney General, there's something in the rule or regulation that violates federal law, then all of those provisions about not using personnel funds, et cetera, would come into place. But it would require that initial determination.
All right, any other further questions? The Wyoming Stock Growers Association. Seeing none, thank you, Mr. McGagna.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other public comments? Please proceed. State your name for the record, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Alan Thompson. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police. And I've had the opportunity to chat with some of our sheriffs across the state over the past week in relation to this bill. And, the discussion that we were just having in the room revolved around, the determination of what makes this in opposition to what the state is intending. And I just ask that as the committee debates this going forward, that they keep in mind that our sheriffs generally do not work with federal criminal law, let alone civil law, or especially land management law. So as far as cooperating with this bill, should it become law, the sheriffs just need that guidance or input on what might be, in contrast to federal land management, because they wouldn't want to unintentionally violate this by cooperating with our federal partners, because we do cooperate on numerous things throughout the state for different reasons. And to answer an earlier question, Mr. Chairman, about the feasibility of using WildLink and possibly being in opposition to this bill. The way I read the proposed legislation on page 5, line 15 or 14 and 15, for purposes not specifically identified in subsection A. And then if you go back to page 4, line 15, the intent is, to enforce, administer, or coordinate. I think our sheriffs could have agreements with federal partners to use their radio channels on WildLink. And none of those agreements in my experience would have been made specifically for the enforcement of a law that we didn't even know was going to exist. So I think it would be a hard stretch to allow the usage of the radio system on the local level and be in violation of this statute or this bill should it become law. I'd stand for any questions, Mr.
All right.
Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Any questions or Mr. Thompson, excuse me.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess that's my concern is I want to make sure I get the intent of what we're trying to accomplish. I just don't know that we've threaded the needle.
Sure.
And I quilt, so I feel like it's appropriate for me to be able to use that expression. So I will use it all the time now. But I mean, that is just it is, if you have a serious crime that occurs on a county road that's right next to some federal land, and maybe there's something really bad that happens and you need to coordinate in some fashion. I just don't want to, inhibit or put you guys in a hard spot because we didn't get this right. And I don't know that I feel like we're close to getting it right. So that's my concern. And so that is my question. Do you think we've really threaded the needle? Is this ready for prime time or I don't think it is, but I'd be curious to know your thoughts.
Mr. Thompson.
Mr. Chairman, to answer the question, we've reviewed this for less than a week and a couple of eyes on it. At first blush, it looks very palatable from the sheriff's position. But there's circumstances out there that I haven't thought of, or some of them haven't thought of that I can't give to you right now. I think there's very reasonable, I wouldn't call them exceptions, but language within the bill that allows law enforcement, whether it be federal or local, to do their job. But making sure that when land management becomes the focus of it, we think right now that it'd be very easy to pick that out. And I can't think of, or we can't think of other examples where that might put us in opposition to the language in the bill at this point.
Senator Kolb, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to put the sideboard on, certainly we don't want to jeopardize life safety. I think that's pretty clear. But I certainly don't want to aid and abet the BLM in, grabbing people out there for some sort of trespass violation for driving on some grass on an existing road. That's obviously the other side of the spectrum when it comes to cooperation, say using the truncated system. So I recognize that. But I think we somehow have to craft a clear distinction between those two things. And I think that's the issue at hand. If they want to go out there and do what they want to do, they put people in federal prison, they do whatever they want to do, right? That's their prerogative, because it's federal law. But I certainly don't want the state of Wyoming helping them in that effort. So that's the other side of what I'd like for us not to do. Now, so I look forward to some suggestions you may have. Maybe you just probably need some time to think about this, that we can somehow craft language that authorizes the WildLink folks that I understand are in Cheyenne on how they cooperate with the BLM. In other words, I think we should have no cooperation with the BLM when it comes to any information that doesn't relate to some sort of serious event that involves, like, say, life safety. And maybe that can be taken care of at the WildLink level with the dispatcher they have that I found out just does that. But just some input from you, the Chief Sheriff Association, on how you think we can make people safe and then not aid and abet somebody trying to, put onerous regulations upon us that we disagree with as a state. So,
Mr.
thank you.
Thompson. Any
Yeah,
comments?
Mr. Chairman, to answer a couple of questions in there. So there's a couple of different levels of WildLink usage. there's, I presume, some level of agreement on the state level with the usage of WildLink by different partners outside of local law enforcement. And then there's also the allowance that local law enforcement has over their specific frequencies and agreements that they make with certain entities to have access to or to use those frequencies. And I think that's where those local agreements would haven't up until this point been crafted to allow this type of action. Could be maybe if this law requires revisited. But as far as the state using that or the state allowing that use, that's a question out of my purview. And then one other thing that does in early conversations about this cause us some concern is there are some jails across our state that have agreements with the federal government for housing prisoners. And none of those agreements that they have would have contemplated not accepting prisoners based on the type of crime that had occurred. So, making sure that we're not opposing or violating any of the proposed language in here, and recognizing that that agreement had taken place prior to this might be a consideration for this legislation, that going forward, if they recraft an agreement with the government, with the federal government, they might have to take that into consideration.
Chairman Borner.
Thank you, Mr. Coach. I'm actually dovetails right into the question I was about to ask. Looks like 43 U.S. Code 173C, contemplates these sorts of agreements that you just mentioned. And so I was just wondering if you might want to give a little bit more detail as what those look like currently. And certainly, I think a grandfather clause would be appropriate. Considering we're worried about potential future actions, not the current status quo. So just a little bit more detail about what those agreements look like, if you could.
Mr. Thompson.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have that information today, but I will seek that out.
Representative Tarver, please.
Thank you, sir. So I was just looking at this. So is there any way we can give, upon the determination of the governor, is there any way we can give the power back to the local authorities? I don't know that the governor's gonna have his finger on the pulse for everything that's going around in the state. And especially where there's so many individual deals that were made, like you were speaking of. Why couldn't we write the bill in such a manner as to give the power to the local authorities?
Mr. Thompson.
Mr. Chairman, our early conversations about this topic were about that federal land management. And generally speaking, our local law enforcement doesn't have experience understanding, reading, or enforcing any kind of federal land management law. And generally, when we get input on that topic across the state, that comes from the state government. So that in our conversations earlier was having someone in that expertise, that role to advise the local law enforcement, this is one of those cases, or this is not one of those cases, is simply what we were looking for. As far as the agreements with the federal partners on various things like jail and other mutual aid agreements in the county, I do agree that that would be a local level decision to make.
Follow up, Mr. Tarver. Representative Tarver.
I could be off base, but the sheriff of Rock Springs, I don't think he really cares what anyone else thinks. In my opinion, he's going to follow the Constitution the way he best sees fit. And I don't think he's looking for advice from anyone. And that was my point. These local, they're elected officials. If we don't like how they're taking care of business, they can get voted out. But he wants to follow the Constitution the way he sees it and the way he reads it. And this bill, I don't know if we're giving him that ability with this bill is really my question to you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that is a really good point. And coming from a county in my law enforcement experience that had very little accessible BLM land, our conversations were crafting this to fit 23 sheriffs across the state, not with the intent to take that power away from local law enforcement's decision making, but to protect local law enforcement from making a decision that's contrary to this bill and being able to get that input from someone else that does have that expertise.
Yeah, just to follow up on that discussion, you don't see anything in this bill that would prevent a sheriff from taking his own initiative and making a decision like Sheriff Gross Nickel did. There's nothing in the bill to prevent that. What is there?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, no, not to my reading of this bill. I don't see anything that would limit a local sheriff from exercising his or her own discretion.
Any other comments, or questions, for Mr. Thompson? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here. Appreciate you, all the service of those that you represent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee.
Any other public comment? Anyone else care to provide testimony? Anyone online? Committee, what's your pleasure? Natural Resources Protection Act. Moved by Chairman Boner. Seconded by Senator Cold. Discussion. Senator Ellis, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand the comments made at the last hearing. I went back and watched the hearing. I think my concern is the process that we have in place right now really, I think, addresses situations where a federal agency is overstepped. You know, again, going back to the Rocksource Resource Management Plan, once that becomes final, if the agency is still moving forward with its preferred alternative that people really dislike, that our state objects to, they would file likely something called a preliminary injunction in federal court, and that would preserve the status quo. And the state would have to make all these arguments that, you know, they violated FLIPMA, they violated NEPA. This will create harm. A judge would look at their request for an injunction, a preliminary injunction pretty quickly. And if granted, that would maintain the status quo. So then nothing would change. Law enforcement wouldn't have to alter their behavior. And then it would go through the, you know, court process. And so I think that that works right now. And, you know, just things to consider. FLIPMA, NEPA is a procedural statute. So even if an agency unlawfully broke that law, the remedy is agency go back and do it again. Study it more. Give us a better explanation of why you made the decision you did. And so I don't, you know, if that were to happen, I don't think Wyoming would be really satisfied with that outcome, but this law doesn't really get after that situation. I think the other concern I have is just that it's a determination by the governor with the advice of the attorney general to the point about, you know, who's on the ground and dealing with this. I don't know that this would even be utilized. So I understand the motivation behind it. I think the current process in place really does provide a lot of those protections. You know, certainly if the BLM goes forward with its resource management plan in Rock Springs, I fully expect a lawsuit to be filed, and I think the remedies are there. If that weren't the case, then I'd be happy to revisit something like this, but I think the tools are already out there. So I'm probably a no on this guy.
Thank you, Senator Ellis. Any other comments? Senator Cole, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. On that note, though, this bill won't change anything that the court does or doesn't do. Won't have a negative outcome, won't really do anything in that world. I think I'm still of the mind that this bill focuses on, first off, restricting cooperation with the BLM under these circumstances as determined in the bill. And so I don't see where the court will do what the court does, and obviously it's a different branch of government. I don't see where this affects that outcome. That's what I'd like. If it does, I guess I want to hear that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other comments?
That's for amendments. Mr.
Yes, let's go
So-
through the bill.
Okay, yeah, let's start off with hopefully a straightforward one, page 3, line 16. Strike the words both historic land management practices and in accordance with the staff comment just below it. So
Seconded by Senator Ellis. Any discussion on Chairman Boner's proposed amendment to eliminate both historic land management practices and?
Question.
Question being called, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Co-Chairman Boner.
you just know I got another one. Well, and
While
so,
the iron's hot.
right, fair enough. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll provide a conceptual amendment, if it's okay with the committee, just say on page 4, line 21, add a grandfather clause for existing agreements between a local entity and the federal agency. Don't have the exact language, but hopefully that concept is straightforward enough.
Second? Okay, second by Senator Cole. Discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I don't understand it. What this would cover, the grandfathering language. Because we've talked about this, there are some agreements that are directly related to very distinct federal land management decisions and others that are a little further removed. So I'm just trying to understand how this makes it cleaner or more clear.
Co-Chairman Bowler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, it'd be a grandfather clause for any and all agreements prior to the effective date of the act. So hopefully that would cover it, regardless of, and it doesn't even really get into the question of, which, what exact policies we would not be enforcing or helping enforce. It would just be a general grandfather clause for any and all agreements before the effective date.
Any and all MOUs that may be enforced at the time?
So
Correct.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Boner, I'm looking at line 15 on page 4 then. I mean, what we're really trying to get after is anything new going forward. So this is the part where we would enforce or administer or coordinate. I understand very clearly what enforce or administer means. It's the or coordinate with. So, another way of looking at that would be that we wouldn't use any state funds to enforce or administer that new executive order, rule, or regulation. So maybe that's a question for you if we were just strike the words or coordinate with on line 15, do you think that gets us the same concept of the grandfathering that you're intending with your proposed amendment?
Co-Chairman Boner.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good way of going about doing it. I think the point's well taken.
So
That does help. And just specify exactly what we're trying to do here.
friendly amendment.
Yep.
Any other conversation about this proposed amendment?
So, Mr. Chairman, just to be clear, the friendly amendment I'd offer then, if Senator Boner agrees, is on line 15. After the word enforce, strike the comma, insert the word or, and then strike or coordinate with. I just want to make sure we all know what we're voting on.
That's correct.
Okay. Any other conversation about comments about that proposed amendment? Talise, you have that? Okay. All those in favor of this amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? Okay. Senator Boner, do you have any others?
Take a break, see if anybody else has it.
Senator Ellis?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move on page 4, line 8. Before the word rule, insert the word final.
Do I hear a second?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a little explanation. Going back to our favorite example, a proposed rule doesn't take effect until it's final. So in law, you can't sue on something that's just being talked about. And that's a judicial economy. You don't want to sue on anything that's premature. And so I think by adding the word final in here, it doesn't, or the governor couldn't intervene in the middle of a rulemaking. It would only apply once that rule would become effective. And so I think it's cleaner, and I think that would make this bill a lot better and more easy to enforce.
Any other conversation, comments? Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Ellis's proposed amendment on line 8 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That amendment passes. Senator Ellis, you have a lot more writing on that page.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, just my thoughts. I do have a question. We heard the word or some concern about the word. What does review mean on line 17? I don't have a good alternative, but I would agree with the sentiment that review doesn't quite, I think, capture what we're getting after. So I was wondering if any other colleagues had a better word suggestion.
Line 17 on page 4. Co-Chairman Boner?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. I think revoke would work just fine as far as I'm concerned, but I want, be interested to see what also thinks about the word review. Was there any discussion around that particular word? Is there a reason why it's there, or do you think revoke would work just as well?
Mr. Chairman, I think revoke would work.
Okay, so we have a proposal. Do I have a second for revoke?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr.
Senator Ellis.
Chairman, just reading the sentence out loud again, the governor shall not revoke a valid agreement with a federal agency for the state to assume, like we're just mixing our tenses, it seems like. So it's for the state's primacy over regulation. I still don't quite understand. I think that it just needs a little more, and I think we're close, but I think maybe we're not quite there yet. Maybe LSO has as I'm babbling, I'm giving her time to think and work, help us sort through it. So that would be my question. Talise, do you have a thought for us on how to make this sentence read just a little clearer to get after the intent?
Mr. Chairman, maybe the governor shall not revoke a valid primacy agreement with a federal agency over regulation and enforcement of a federal law or program or something along those lines.
Mr. Chairman, I like that language a lot.
Okay. So the amendment is the governor shall not revoke the primacy agreement with a, would you read that one more time for us, Talise?
Mr. Chairman, the governor shall not revoke a valid primacy agreement with a federal agency. For regulation and enforcement of a federal law or program until a court of competent jurisdiction determines the federal executive order, final rule, or regulation is unlawful.
Okay. Any comments? Senator Cole, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm afraid this ties the governor's hands. I am concerned that frankly, I think it takes away authority, shall not revoke. Maybe he does want to revoke it. I mean, maybe there are some circumstances, and will this change cause something else to, not be able to be done? I mean, that is, I guess, my open-ended question about it. It is going to hamper the governor in any future change by this language. Thank you, Mr.
Chairman Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I kind of like this language being in there because we're talking about a very specific circumstance where state government has taken primacy over a federal regulation, where otherwise, say the EPA or the Nuclear Regulatory Commission would be the one enforcing the federal rule. So I think this is something we should protect because it is important that, I think the state should take primacy over regulations whenever possible. And it's why I read it, and it helps, I think, that we adjust the language so it's a little bit more direct. I think that's something that we should encourage. That's the intent of the bill, is having more state responsibility.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Ellis.
I would agree with my the co-chairman. We only get primacy under laws where the federal government has set up that structure of shared, cooperative jurisdiction. So it's clean air, clean water, some nuclear that we just, we're fine-tuned a bill last session. And so if we don't maintain our primacy, then the federal government comes in and does it. So that's what we're just saying, is maybe we're upset about the BLM doing something. That doesn't mean we're going to say, okay, now we want more EPA intervention on clean water or clean air. I think that's what the intention of this. And now it's clear to me that that's what we're getting after. So I hope we keep this language and that amendment in there.
Any further discussion on this amendment? Senator Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the clarification. We'll add that we exceed minimum standards for primacy, just as a note. So it's not always in our best interest. We're dealing with it right now on the Regulatory Reduction Task Force. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All those in favor of this amendment as proposed, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That amendment has passed. Okay, any others? Any other changes, clarification? Okay. Do we need to go through other pages? Senator Boner? You have a blank page on the next one. So.
Last one's blank.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ellis.
Mr. Chairman, I think it is worth a conversation on page 5, paragraph C. Anyone who knowingly violates subsection A is guilty of a misdemeanor. I was just getting nervous when we're punishing public officers who are trying to do their job. I don't know. By giving them a misdemeanor. I move to strike paragraph C, lines 20 through 24 for sake of discussion.
Any second?
Second.
Second by Chairman Boner. Discussion. Co-Chairman Boner.
Like I said, Mr. Chairman, this bill is formulated based on a previous piece of legislation. It's already been through the process. Granted, it was a couple years ago. That's the only reason that provision's in there. So I think it's a worthwhile discussion.
And I might add that it would be a shame for someone to lose their employment because of something like this. It goes on their record.
Question?
Question be called. All those in favor of deleting paragraph C from page 4 or page 5 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Duly noted. All right, any others? Sensing your desire for the question as we're getting late in the day. Talise, this is a roll call vote. Senator, what?
Oh,
Just a
no, I'm
second.
just getting ready.
Oh, okay. All right, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote to sponsor 24 LSO 344 Natural Resource Protection Act as amended. Senator Ellis.
No.
Senator Kolb.
Aye.
Representative Tarver.
Aye.
Representative Winter. Co-Chairman Boner.
Aye.
Chairman Heiner.
Aye.
That motion passes.
Thank you, Talise. Okay, that completes the agenda that we have for today. We've passed a number of, appears to be about 4 bills. So there'll be opportunity for members of the committee to carry these forward. If there's any that really you feel strongly about, please let Chairman Boner or myself know so we can assign these to various individuals to carry on the floor come session time. But we appreciate the efforts of this committee during the interim. We probably won't have any more committee meetings until next year. But I think we did some good work and I congratulate each and every one of you. I appreciate the sacrifices you made to be here and contribute to what we've done today. With that,